Hey BMS math students, this is Mrs. Wilborn and welcome to lesson 9, the final lesson in Accentuate the Negative. And for this lesson we're going to be talking about order of operations and number properties. Our essential question is, how do I perform integers using order of operations? All right, let's do a brief review of order of operations. And I tried to locate Miss Tyson because I know she has a really cool song that goes with order of operations, but at the time of this recording I could not get her. So I promise you that I will track Miss Tyson down and do a recording of her and her order of operations song, and your teachers will put it on their wiki so that you can learn the song and remember how to do order of operations. So let's get started with our review. All right, first of all, let's go through. We have a little acronym that I'm sure you all remember, PEMDAS, or Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally. It's a little phrase that you can remember to help you with the order of operations. So the things that we do first, second, third, fourth, so on and so forth. So the very first thing when you come to a question, you need to make sure that you are simplifying the parentheses. So let's write that in there. Okay, parentheses. All right, the second thing you're going to work on then is exponents. Once you're done exponents, you will move on to multiplying and dividing. And the one thing about multiplying and dividing is that you have to remember that you do whichever comes first from right to left. And I'm just going to abbreviate here. R to L. That means right to left. All right, and after we go through that, then we're going to worry about our adding and subtracting. And again, with adding and subtracting, you will do what comes first, right to left again. Okay, so R to L, right to left. Okay, now if you need to pause the video so that you can finish writing this, please go ahead and do so. All right, it's very important that you know these steps and that you memorize these steps in order to get the right answer. Okay, we have 3 questions that we're going to do together, and remember in your notes you need to be writing every single step down. chances are there's not enough room in your notes to show all your work. So what you may need to do is move it off to the side, find a blank area or a blank space, and complete those answers. Okay? Don't try and squeeze it in there because this is like your textbook. And if you can't read it, it's not going to be helpful. All right, let's go through these 3 practice problems. First of all, you come to a question just like this, and you're going to go run through those order of operations. All right, well, parentheses are first. Well, I don't have parentheses, so I can move on to exponents. I don't have any exponents, so I can move on to multiplying and dividing. Well, whenever you see a star like this, this represents multiplying. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and satisfy -4 times 32. Oops, sorry, let me back up here. We're going to satisfy -4 times 32. Now, I can't do that in my head, so off to the side, I'm going to do 32 times 4. All right, and I can work that out. But remember back from lesson 8 how Miss Smith told you to go back through the signs and do the sign first. Since I'm multiplying a negative times a positive, I know my answer is going to be negative. So I'm going to put the negative sign first. That way I don't forget about the sign. And now I can go through and actually do my multiplying. So 4 times 2 gives me 8, and 4 times 3 gives me 12. So I have 128. So -4 times 32 is -128. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is bring my next operation down and the next number. All right, so now I have -128 plus 6, and since this is the only thing left, it would be my next step in my order of operations. So I'm going to ask myself, are the signs the same? And my answer in this case would be no, because I have a negative number and a positive number. So the rule tells me when the signs are different to find the difference. So notice I'm doing my work way off to the side. So I'm going to find the difference. I'm going to subtract 6 from 128. 8 minus 6 is 2. 2 minus 0 is 2. And 1 minus 0 is 1. So I have 122 as my number answer. And now I just need to go back and make sure that I have the right sign. All right, since -128 was larger and it was negative, my answer is negative. Okay, let's go on to the next question. So I have, again, looking for order of operations. I do have a parentheses here, but the parentheses are only holding a negative number, so there's nothing to simplify inside the parentheses. So what I can do is move on to my exponents. All right, and I do have exponents. This 3, this superscript 3, is called an exponent. It's a power. All right, this tells me how many times to multiply the base, which is -2, by itself. So I need to multiply -2 times itself 3 times. So that's going to require some work. So I'm going to move way off to the side. I'm going to say -2 times -2 times -2. All right, so I'm multiplying -2 by itself 3 times. So I need to start with 2 numbers. Again, I'm going to look for the signs. Since my signs are the same, my answer is positive. And again, as Ms. Smith pointed out, it's not necessary to write the positive sign, but it's helpful just to make sure that you don't forget. 2 times 2 is 4. I'm going to bring my next operation and my next number down. I have a positive times a negative, so that's going to make this negative. And 4 times 2 is 8. So to this part of my problem, this whole parentheses and exponent is going to be replaced with negative 8. So it might be a good idea to cross this out so you know you use that. All right, now my question is going to be 3 times negative 8, and because it's negative, I'm going to keep it in parentheses, and all of that is divided by 6. So now I just have multiplication and division, so I move left to right. So 3 times negative 8, all right, my signs are different, so now I know my answer is going to be negative, and 3 times 8 is 24. And now I move to the last part, which is dividing by 6. Okay, my rule tells me again that, sorry, my pen is acting funny. Bear with me. So I have a positive divided by a negative, so I know my answer is going to be negative. And 24 divided by 6 gives me 4. All right, so 2 down, 1 to go. Last one. Again, I'm going to look for parentheses first. I do have parentheses, and I actually have parentheses which I can simplify. So I need to simplify this first. So 13 minus 6 gives me 7. Okay, I'm going to keep it in parentheses, and then I'm going to bring down this 4 on the outside. All right, notice there's no operation between the 4 and the 7 that's inside parentheses. Whenever you don't see an operation, that should automatically show you that it's going to be multiplication. So now I just have to multiply 4 times 7. Since both numbers are positive, I know my answer is positive. So 4 times 7 gives me 28. All right. So I hope that helped you with order of operations. Now it's your turn. You have 5 questions that you're going to work on. Take them slow, do your scratch work to the side, pause the video, and when you're done, you can return. Your teacher will go over these tomorrow. Keep in mind that they'll be looking for work, that you're showing your work with your 5 your turn questions. So make sure that you're doing that with each of the questions that's given. Okay, the next part of the video talks about number properties. And properties in math are kind of like laws or theories in science. Those are things that we can use and apply that sometimes help us to rearrange the question and make solving the question a little easier. So let's go through our number properties. There are 3 major number properties that you need to know. The first is the commutative property. At any time, pause the video so that you can jot down the definitions in your guided notes. Okay, the commutative property lets us change the order of numbers so that it will not change the answer. This only works with addition or subtraction. So, for example, if I had 5 plus 2, I'll get 7. But if I also had 2 plus 5, I would also get 7. That's using the commutative property. Okay, the root word of commutative is commute, and you can think of commute as meaning to move or how we get to and from work or school or different places we go. So again, we can change the order of the numbers and it won't change the answer, but it only works for addition or multiplication. The associative property tells us that we can change the groupings of math terms, which are just the numbers, but it doesn't change your answer. Again, this only works for multiplication and for addition. A way to think about and to remember the associative property is to think of your associates. And word associates kind of refers to like your friends or the different groups of people that you hang out with. And you may have a group of friends at school, and you may have a group of friends at church, and you may have a group of friends in your neighborhood. And they may or may not be the same people. So with the associative property, we can change the groupings and it won't change our answer. One of the key things with the associative property is that you are going to see parentheses. And the numbers stay in the same place, but the parentheses move. So that's how you can identify the associative property. And finally, the distributive property, which is probably the one that we use the most, or at least the one that we see the most. And the distributive property is when you pass out the number on the outside of the parentheses to the numbers inside the parentheses through multiplication. So if you think of a teacher passing out or distributing a quiz, they're giving one to each student. All right, well, in the distributive property, we're going to multiply the number outside the parentheses to each and every number inside the parentheses. If you need to pause the video to finish jotting down the terms, the vocabulary terms, please do so. Okay, here is an example of the commutative property. All right, notice, let me get my pen going here. Notice in the commutative property that in this case we have A plus B equals B plus A. It also works for multiplication. A plus B, or A times B, equals B times A. So it doesn't matter if we're adding 13 plus 42 or 42 plus 13, we're still going to end up with the same answer. We'll get 55 either way. Same thing with multiplication. We can multiply 12 times 4 to get 48, or we can multiply 4 times 12 to get 48. Either way the numbers are arranged, we'll end up with the same answer. All right, and here's an example of the associative property. Notice the parentheses. All right, the numbers stay in the same position, but the parentheses move. So, for example, I have A plus the sum of B plus C. And that equals the sum of A plus B plus C. Whenever you see parentheses and addition sign in there, you're going to say the word sum. All right? Or, in this case, if you see parentheses with a multiplication, you'll say product, the product. So in this case, I have A times the product of B times C, which is equal to, notice my parentheses have moved, my numbers have stayed in the same place, the product of A times B times C. So here's some examples of numbers that we'll get. It doesn't matter. Notice, again, my numbers are in the same position. I have 16, then 27, then 20. Here I have the same thing, 16 plus 27 plus 20. And that doesn't matter. It is simply just the groupings that change, the parentheses that have changed. And it works for multiplication as well. Okay, so it doesn't matter if I multiply 11 times 15 and then multiply that product times 3, or I multiply 3 times 11 and then that product by 15, I'm going to end up with the same space, the same answer. Okay, the distributive property is the one that we use the most. And here's what the property looks like in algebra. Okay, it's A outside, A times the sum of B plus C. And we get A times B plus A times C. All right, here's what it looks like with numbers. If I have 3 times the sum of A plus 12, I'm going to get 3 times A plus 36. So I'm basically taking this 3 and I'm multiplying it times A to get 3A, and then I'm multiplying it by positive 12 to get positive 36. Let's do a few more. All right, so again, we're passing out by multiplying the number outside the parentheses to the numbers inside the parentheses. And I'm going to have you add a few more on this slide. So we'll do a couple and then we'll talk about a couple more. All right, so for example, we have 3 times the sum of 4 plus 6. If I were to simplify this using the distributive property, that means I want to get rid of these parentheses. And basically what I would do is I would take the 3 and I'm going to multiply it by 4. 3 times 4 is 12. And it's positive 3 times positive 4 gives me positive 12. And I'm going to multiply 3 times positive 6, which gives me 3 times 6 gives me positive 18. Now, certainly you can simplify this, but we're just showing you the distributive property. That's how this works. And notice my parentheses are now removed. All right, let's try this one. So I have negative 2 times the sum of 5 plus 2. So using the distributive property, I would multiply negative 2 times positive 5. It's very helpful to say the signs. So a negative times a positive gives me negative, and 2 times 5 gives me 10. And I want to then do the second part of this. So negative 2 times a positive 2. Negative 2 times positive 2 gives me negative, and 2 times 2 is 4. All right, let's try a couple more. So these are a couple special instances. So here's number 3, and you'll have to write this down. I know this is not in your notes, but there's plenty of space so you can go ahead and write this down. So for number 3, we have 3 times the difference between x and 2. All right, so 3 times the difference of x minus 2. All right, well, same rules apply. I take the number outside and I multiply it by each number inside. So 3 times x, this is a variable. We don't know how much this is worth. So we just stick them side by side, indicating that we're going to multiply them. 3 times x gives us 3x. And then 3 times negative 2, a positive times a negative is a negative, and 3 times 2 is 6. So 3 times the difference between x and 2 is 3x minus 6 once I've used the distributive property. All right, here's number 4. All right, so let's say negative 4, and again, you'll need to write this down, negative 4, not y, but 4, parentheses, x minus 2. Okay, so let's go through. Same thing, I'm going to multiply negative 4 times x. All right, negative times positive is negative, and 4 times x gives me 4x. And now I have, second part, negative 4 times negative 2. Okay, the sign in front goes with the number. It's a good way to remember this. The sign in front goes with the number. So negative 4 times negative 2. A negative times a negative is a positive. So I'm going to write positive, and 4 times 2 is 8. All right, sometimes this is another special instance that you'll see. And then we're going to give you a couple to try on your own. Sometimes outside of parentheses you may just have this negative sign or this opposite sign. Okay, either one. They all do the same thing in math. All right, and let's say we have the opposite of 3, or let's make it a 5, sorry. 5 plus 2. All right, whenever you see an opposite sign or a negative sign in front of parentheses, we have this thing in math that's called the understood one. And basically what you need to do is you need to stick a 1 between the sign and the parentheses. And we are going to distribute this negative 1. All right, it's called the rule or the understood one. And so because there's no number there, but there is a negative sign, we're going to distribute that negative 1. We're kind of understanding that there is a 1 there. And so we still need to do the same procedure. So negative 1 times positive 5 gives us negative 5. And negative 1 times a positive 2. A negative times a positive is negative, and 1 times 2 is 2. So, my answer, as I distribute it through the distributive property, is negative 5 minus 2. Okay, I hope that was enough examples to show you how the distributive property works. This is the one that, again, we use the most, and we need to really, really have a good understanding before we move on. Again, I know that you don't have these your turn questions, but I'd like for you to jot these down, and there's plenty of white space on the end of your notes. So I'm going to have you jot these down, and then you're going to solve these tonight. You can pause the video and solve them, and then your teacher will go over these with you tomorrow. All right, so here's number 1. Here's number 2, and you're solving all of these using the distributive property. Here's number 3. Here's number 4. Here's number 5. And the last one, number 6. And that's a y, 3 plus y. Alright, so what I'd like for you to do is to pause your video, solve these questions for your turn, and tomorrow your teacher will review them. Be prepared for a video quiz in the morning, and come with questions. If you're not sure about how to solve some of these, you need to come with questions. Your teacher will review them with you. Great job, and congratulations on completing Unit 1.